Oh, my chair just fell. Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, or welcome to my channel if you've never been here before. Hi, how are ya? Nice to meet ya. Today I wanted to talk about a really important topic as far as plant keeping goes, and that is choosing the right planter. What is right will be different for each of us depending on our environments, our plant keeping styles. I'll be categorizing all planters by porous and non-porous. There are a lot of different planter materials that can fall into these two categories. Porous planters have small pores in whatever material they're made of that are not moisture sealed. These tiny unsealed pores allow for air and moisture to escape through, whereas the non-porous option, these pores are either moisture sealed or the planters are made out of material that don't allow for air and moisture to escape through. I think to get started, I'm gonna do a little bit of a pros and cons list, and I'll give specific examples for how I've chosen planters in the past, or some workarounds, some ways to make either of these options work for you, for whatever plant you want. Starting with porous planters, some porous planter options would be terracotta, basalt, cement, unglazed clay. Those are just what comes off the top of my head. There are probably other options out there. I am not all-knowing. I act like it, but I'm not all-knowing. Pros, like we talked about, the air and water can escape through, so it does provide a lot more aeration to the roots. So if you're a chronic overwaterer, porous planters are a really great option. Porous planters tend to be lighter weight. Like with this peace lily back here, it is a very large size plant. Large plants like this, especially once you get all the substrate, get them watered, they can be really, really heavy to move around. And using a terracotta planter, which is what I have this one in now, makes it a lot more lightweight and easier to move from place to place if need be. The tub to give them a really good spray, or you know, they get moved sometimes. They also tend to be less expensive. The bigger a plant gets, the more expensive the planter is going to cost. So I do like to use large-sized porous planters where I can. Because porous planters allow that air and moisture to escape through, they are a lot better at regulating the temperature down around the root system. With the air and moisture flow, it's just a lot better at temperature regulating. So overall, they do stay a lot cooler. Warm environments are very conducive for bacterial and fungal issues that can just like really exacerbate a problem down around the roots. Porous planters do tend to look a little more natural and like rustic, which that's not everybody's style, so that could be a pro or a con, I guess. Over time, the longer you have the planter, they do get these like salt, mineral, algae deposits on them, which leaves really cool markings on the terracotta. I personally love patina, but I know it's like an individual thing. So again, I guess this could be a pro or a con. You'll have to let me know where you stand on the patina issue. If I see a brand new terracotta, I'm like, ugh. If I see a finely aged patinaed terracotta, I'm like, I need it. I think it's beautiful. Now to the cons. The biggest con I can think of is the fact that they do need more frequent waterings. Of course, it does depend on what kind of plant you put in there, because it allows that airflow. The air is going to dry out the substrate. Yeah, so sometimes they can be a little bit hard to keep up on. Back to the peace lily example I gave, it's kind of a trade-off because where the planter is lighter weight, and that's really nice, I do have to water this a lot more because peace lily is a thirsty plant and this sucker dries out so much. I'm watering this like twice a week right now. It's a trade-off. In this case, it's worth it to me, but I wouldn't want every single one of my plants in something like this because I wouldn't be able to keep up on it. Where the substrate will dry out a lot more quickly in the porous planters, it can cause some root issues. If you're letting your plant dry out even a little bit too much in between waterings, the roots can really form themselves, gravitate toward the planter walls and cling to the planter walls in search of whatever moisture they can find. I've specifically seen this issue in Hoya. For some reason, the Hoya roots really tend to cling. I am a Hoya underwaterer though, so that's probably a me issue, but it is definitely something to be mindful of. They're also a lot more fragile. The ceramic might withstand a drop. This sucker is not going to withstand it. They tend to kind of shatter pretty easily if dropped, so Gotta be careful of that. Back to the patina. If terracotta is kept in a wet or very humid environment, I'm thinking of my grow tent here, they can form like algae, kind of slimy deposits in the patina. This is usually like green or kind of orangey brownish. It can get really slippery and it's kind of off-putting, even to me, a patina lover. It's easy to scrub off with just like a brush and water or dish soap. That's just like an extra step. So yeah, I consider the slimy stuff a downside for sure. So there are also a lot less design options in these non-porous planters. I don't know, I mean, you can really search and find some unique, especially terracotta, there are some more unique options. The easily accessible, you know, like big box store available planters are very basic. There's not a whole lot of variety. So if you're someone like me that likes to have a variety of every color, of every shape, of every size, of every design, these may not be the best option. How we talked about the planter walls can hold moisture or kind of like conduct moisture through them. Is that the word? I don't know. They can also damage furniture. So this goes for porous saucers as well. I have ruined so many windowsills by using these porous planters, and I thought it was just kind of me spilling water. Over time, I've realized that's actually not the issue. I wanted to use the cheapest option. It pulled moisture down, ruined a lot of paint, a lot of wood. Not good. Those are all the porous pros and cons I could think of. Like, feel free to add anything you would like to add down in the comments. It's always so helpful. Now I'm gonna move on to the non-porous pros and cons list, and some non-porous options I can think of are glazed ceramic, porcelain, metal, and plastic. They hold moisture a lot better. These are often a lot more durable. It's pretty durable, like as far as drops and that kind of thing goes. And the biggest pro of these kinds of planters are the design options. There is such a variety of planters, and it makes it a lot of fun to really be able to customize your collection to you and your style. It's a lot of fun. It makes plant keeping a lot of fun, in my opinion. That's the biggest pro I can think of, honestly. And as much as I appreciate that factor of the non-porous options, there is quite a hefty list of cons. They're typically more expensive. Plastic and metal, not so much, but you know, ceramic and porcelain for sure are more expensive. They're often heavier. Again, not so much the metal or the plastic, but they have their own issues we'll get into in a minute. This was also on the pro list, but it can definitely be a con that these planters tend to hold moisture a lot more. This category of planters, it's kind of a toss-up of if they're going to have drainage. For some reason, so many ceramic planters out there don't have drainage, which me personally, I don't really see it as too much of a con because there are workarounds to this, which we'll get into in a little bit. Less root aeration means it's a lot easier to get root rot and those kinds of things. Metal can rust over time. Plastic, if you keep it, especially if you keep it in like direct sunlight, can get kind of brittle. I've had so many plastic planters just like shatter because they got too much light or warmth or something, so they can be a little bit brittle and degrade over time. And how I kind of mentioned before, they do really hold onto heat, so that can be a big issue, especially for plants that you move outdoors. Definitely, it gets a little bit confusing trying to navigate the pros and cons because what's a pro for me may not be a pro for you, you know? Like, I like the patina, maybe you hate the patina. I am okay to water some of my plants more often, whereas others I'm not so much. So it's like, how can I decide? There are just so many factors to take into account. I just want to make sure that it's a planter that the plant will be able to stay in long term as possible, because I don't want to be repotting my plants every few months. I really, really don't. So here are all the things that I consider. Number one, am I going to be moving this planter outside in the summer? If the answer is yes, I am not going to be putting that plant into a porous planter. These planters allow for a lot more like root aeration and they dry out so fast. I do just want my planters outside to hold as much moisture as possible. But on the flip side, if it's a plant I'm going to be keeping in direct sunlight outside, it needs to be in a terracotta. Otherwise, I really worry about holding onto too much heat and causing those root issues. It's such a conundrum. from? How are we supposed to know? I kind of just go with my gut at the end of the day, but all of my planters outside are non-porous. Next, of course, I consider the plant type and its watering needs. Porous planters are excellent for desert plants, cacti and succulents, and ones that really hold on to a lot of water within their plant tissues, so they don't need as much watering around the roots. For example, my Tephrocarpus geometricus, I have this in a cement planter because it can really dry out around the roots and the plant will be just fine. There are some workarounds to this though, like kangaroo fern, a fern which likes to stay damp around the roots, is in a basalt planter, but my workaround for this is I put it in a very tall glass like vase bowl dish thing that keeps it really, really wet down there. It's not drying out too much. It's non-porous, it's glass, so the moisture isn't escaping that way. It really just escapes from the top of the plant. So it makes it a lot easier to keep watered. And I love the way it looks. How we talked that the non-porous options tend to not have drainage holes. I'm personally not like fearful of potting into a planter with no drainage holes. It is definitely something I consider. I think especially as a beginner, drainage holes are really important. It's really difficult to regulate how often a plant needs to be watered. My plants without drainage holes dry out a lot more slowly than you would think, which is a pro, but also a con depending on how you look at it. If I love a planter and it doesn't have a drainage hole, that's not something that's gonna stop me from buying the planter. Maybe in the beginning, it's a good idea to avoid those ones until you kind of figure out watering frequencies before like taking that next step. But there are workarounds to planters with no drainage. The easiest, probably most popular of which is to use these no drainage planters as cover pots. So pot your plant into like nursery pot and stick that planter inside of the cover pot. The cover pot basically acts as like the plant saucer, so the water can drain out still, but you still get the look of the cute planter that you want without the drainage holes. You could also pot directly into these planters. I like to sprinkle a little layer of horticultural charcoal at the bottom to help keep things clean down around the very bottom of the planter where the most moisture is going to sit. Down at the very bottom is not going to dry out very much. So the charcoal definitely helps keep things cleanly. I'll also use a chunkier mix in these kinds of planters. I'll add a lot more pumice, a lot more perlite, a lot more cocoa chips, orchid bark, whatever chunky things I have to add, I'll add like a lot more of it to pot these plants in, because the big chunky pieces allow for more air pockets, and the more air pockets means the more airflow down around the roots, so less rot, bacterial, fungal issues. And of course, you can always make your own drainage holes if those other workarounds aren't your style. I personally don't like doing this because I have a fear of tools. Sometimes drilling your own drainage holes can shatter planters. I've had that happen to me, and it's so sad when that happens, so I just don't. But I heard if you spray water down where you're going to be drilling, it helps prevent cracking, or also like putting some masking or painter's tape in like an X over where you're going to drill. Can help prevent cracking. So that's always an option. Definitely size and weight is something to consider when picking a planter. Ceramic, porcelain, those kinds of planters are a lot more expensive than like terracotta or basalt or cement. I tend to choose the more expensive ones for my smaller plants because it kind of evens out a little bit. If I'm only having to buy like a little 4-inch planter, yes, the ceramic is still more expensive than like a 4-inch terracotta, but it's something that I can fit within my budget. Whereas something big like this, if I were to get a ceramic planter, it's gonna be like double, maybe triple the cost. The size really is like a big factor for me. Also, those ceramic planters are so freaking heavy for my like grow tent plants in a very humid, warm environment. I do prefer porous planters because if it's really humid, they're not going to dry out as much. Again, it's just a more conducive environment for bacteria and fungus and rot. Having that little bit of extra airflow through the planter walls can really help root systems in high humidity environments. Plus, keeping these planters in a high humid grow tent environment does result, in my opinion, in a lot more beautiful little markings, and I love it. So it's another benefit of keeping them in the grow tent. Another thing to consider is how often do you want to be watering your plant? So this Passiflora trifasciata right here, I have it in a ceramic planter with no drainage hole because this is a thirsty plant, and it's one that I let this dry out maybe 20–30% between waterings. If it dries out more than that, it kills off leaves. For plants like that, I don't necessarily want to be watering them that often. I will keep them in the non-porous planters so that it kind of evens out. Where it's a very thirsty plant, maybe would have to water like 2–3 times a week. In a porous planter, keeping them in a ceramic planter like this, make it a little bit of an easier plant to keep. Instead of working myself to the bone, keeping them in something like this just makes it so much easier to maintain. And allows for a little bit more room for error, which, trust me, these plants have seen some error. We've gone through some rough times and they're still kicking. So I think that says something. If you're an overwaterer, go with porous. If you're an underwaterer, go with non-porous. If your plant is like a calathea or a fern, go non-porous. Now I'm gonna walk around and show you some of my plant varieties and what planter I chose to pot them in and why, to hopefully like paint the picture a little bit more fully. It's so hard for me to say so many words. I get like kind of confused. So I think this will hopefully like bring it full circle and you can see what I mean and how I make the different planter decisions that I make. I spend a lot of time scrolling on Pinterest. Most of my feed, as you can imagine, is about like houseplants or like jungalow style, those kinds of things. I do get a lot of information from places like Pinterest, also of course Instagram, but lately it's less Instagram because of how Instagram is. So I do gravitate more toward Pinterest. Anyway, I find that like scrolling through, searching up houseplant style really helped me get a lot of inspiration. It's not like I'm scrolling through Pinterest to just outright copy people's styles. I think it's more so just to give myself an idea of what looks I like, what kind of colors and shapes of planters I like. Something about myself I've learned from doing this is I don't really gravitate toward the super brightly colored planters. In the past, I definitely just bought a planter if I liked the color of it, which yeah, isn't like a bad method, but a lot of times I just ended up with these planters that didn't really look good with any of my plants and I would never end up potting into them. So it was just kind of wasted money for me just for an empty planter to be sitting around. I really more gravitate toward like earthy colors. I think the earth and nature clearly is a big inspiration of mine in not just my plant collection decor, but my home decor style in general. I tend to stick to neutrals, and where I still do like a pop of color, it's more earthy pops of color. So I really like yellows, oranges, blues and greens and like deep bluey grays, those kinds of colors. I also really like a lot of texture, like this planter here has some texture on it. Also, these little polymer clay planters I make have a lot of texture. So yeah, I like things to look kind of busy, but not busy in a color way. I like them more to be busy from like texture or having interesting shapes or that kind of thing as opposed to super in your face colors. Yeah, let me show you what I got going on here. Well, this one here I thrifted. Most of my planters I find thrifting, and I don't know, it just really feels so much more special, so much more exciting when I thrift a planter than when I'm buying it at a big box. I love this one. It's just interesting enough that if you notice it, you like want to look at it and see kind of everything that it has going on, and you'll notice there's a lot more color than maybe you initially thought when it first caught your eye. There's also a lot of little textural things, also some cool shapely things down here, and no drainage. So yeah, just an example. Earlier in the video, I was talking specifically about this fern, and you can kind of see there's like a pool of water down here, which even though the pool of water isn't actually touching this terracotta planter, which somehow just fits perfectly inside of there, you can see it is still moist around here because this glass dish helps hold in the moisture. It's not just evaporating willy-nilly, but it keeps the planter wet, so the roots are pretty constantly wet. In this kind of a setup, I do prefer to use a very, very chunky mix. Otherwise, I would definitely end up with rot and other weird fungal bacterial issues. So another planter example I have to show you is this right here. So I have this is an anthurium of some sort, and then just a random pop-up fern that I took from another plant and potted into here because I thought it would look pretty cool. I just have it sitting on this black stand, but this is actually just like a glass bowl, obviously with no drainage. That's really shallow, and I love the look of really shallow planters like this. This kind of goes back to what I was talking about earlier on Pinterest, where I realized I was pinning a lot of things like this, and I think it's because the shape of vessel isn't really something you typically think of when it comes to plants. I mean, I guess kind of more so for like succulent arrangements. I didn't mention glass earlier, but this is of course a non-porous planter. It is water sealed. There's no water escaping through the actual vessel itself. Perfect for housing a fern like this. So pretty. So yeah, I mean, like, you really can make whatever you want be a planter. If there's a will, there's a way. I've seen people like pot plants into frickin' basketballs, okay? If there's a will, there's a way. Another one I need to show you, not necessarily for good reasons. This is a good example of a planter plant combo gone wrong. My philodendron, or wait, is it a philodendron or a pothos? Philodendron micans. Up here, it's kind of yellowing and drying out. On paper, this planter should be perfect for this plant because it was a 2-inch pot size up. It has a somewhat thick saucer drainage system here. It is an attached saucer, which I'm honestly not a super fan of. This is terracotta, and I have the plant potted in this like super, super chunky mix. You can see it's really, really chunky. Not a whole lot of moisture retention. So had I potted this plant into something a little more moisture retaining, I think this would be a great combination, but right now it's just drying out way too much. With the combination of the terracotta and the mix I used, and then also the saucer. I think I would like a little bit deeper saucer. It does sit high up on my TV mantle. It's kind of in a place where I'm not like thinking to water it constantly, or I'm not wanting to water it fully because this overfills quite easily. Even though it is a little bit of a thicker saucer, like normally when they're attached like this, they're even smaller. So this is a pretty good sized attached saucer, but I'm gonna repot this and I'm going to help fix the underwatering issue I'm clearly having. I'm gonna actually put this into a glazed, no drainage hole. It's actually like kitchenware. I'm gonna pot it into that so that I can just kind of add water when I think about it, and there will be a little pool of water probably at the bottom of the vessel that the plant can drink from so that it doesn't overly dry like this one has. This is an example of a combination I chose that just is not working out. Let's turn it so you can see how big these leaves are getting, but I have to show you my philodendron Jose Buono. Look how big it's getting. This is a plant I'm needing to water like quite a bit because it is so big. So I'm having to water this all the time, and I did pot it into this really long shaped terracotta planter. An easy fix for something like this, a terracotta planter that's drying out way too much, is a deeper saucer. I can top water this plant all the way through and allow the saucer to fill up, and the plant has a little bit of extra water from down here to like stay a little bit better watered. This is a temporary solution until I'm able to get this potted into a planter I think fits the plant a little more, but Hopefully thrifting, I find the perfect thing. But oh my gosh, that leaf is freaking huge. Is that crazy or what? That's so cool. I love this plant. Okay. You know how they say you should only pot up like 2 inches bigger than the last pot size? I do not believe in that. If my plant is drying out way too fast, if it's a quick growing plant like this that puts out really big leaves, gets a lot of sun, grows quickly, I'm gonna pot it into the biggest frickin' planter I can so that it can hold more moisture to keep up with the growth. And that is the case with this one. This is a ceramic planter. There's no drainage hole, and I water this thing really, really thoroughly to the point that I know there's water sitting down here. I did put a layer of charcoal at the bottom to help keep it clean. It does help the plant be able to continue to grow big because it always has water stores to pull from. Especially if you're using a very chunky mix like I am here, it's something you can definitely get away with and helps make plant care, plant watering specifically, so much easier. So yeah. Yeah. Beautiful plant, huh? I've also got to talk about my Begonia maculata whitei planter. I have it in down here, this really like long ceramic one. If a plant grows really tall and top heavy, how this variety does, I like to pot them into longer planters so that the roots can grow further down into the planter and help stabilize the plant a little bit. It can help like offset the weight of the plant. So that's kind of something I didn't mention in the video, but this has been a great planter for this very top heavy plant. This is my money tree. This is actually a wine chiller. It is terracotta, where this is a plant that doesn't really appreciate drying out too much. It doesn't have a drainage hole, so even though there is definitely airflow through the terracotta, there's no drainage. And I think it looks so cute. Again, with the long planter look, that's also kind of something I think I discovered I liked when scrolling on Pinterest. I really like little skinny tall planters like this. I think they look so cool, and especially as this plant gets bigger, it's gonna be so beautiful. And what's perfect, it came with this little plastic piece to put on the bottom to help protect furniture, which is perfect. All right, welcome to my grow tent. What I want to show you down here, clear planters. Wow, look at those chunky roots coming out the bottom. I like to be able to see what's going on down here. I can also tell if my plant has been thoroughly saturated. These have been great for so many reasons. It's fun to be able to watch the roots, and it was helpful to see where my watering inadequacy was. I just was not watering them enough to actually drench everything. I think that's all I want to show you in here. I don't have too many in here. Oh, I will show you my other little wine chiller. This is no drainage, but it is porous and perfect for the grow tent. I think at the end of the day, choosing the right planter can make all the difference in the success we have with our plants. It's something that in the beginning I wasn't as aware of or like tuned into. I didn't really pay attention. I was just kind of buying planters and potting my plants into what I thought looked pretty, which yeah, that makes it fun, but but at the end of the day, I think it's most important to consider our plant and environment and what they need. If you have any additional tips or tricks or considerations you make into choosing the perfect planter for your plants, I am all ears. Please. That's going to be it for this one. I will see you next time. Bye!